This is Can I Laugh on Your Shoulder? It's always a very fun podcast week when I have not one, but two incredible guests on the show this week. So Chris and Julie, welcome to the Can I Laugh on Your Shoulder podcast. How are you? Thank you for being here.
Molly, we're so glad to be here. I feel like we've already known you for a long time. We only talked for a few minutes.
This is an honor. This is fun.
We go way back to 17 minutes ago is what we are
about roosters and all types of things.
Yes, we did.
It is we're deep into this this friendship. I'm really excited about it. We found out we're book cousins. It's like we're basically related at this point.
Twice removed, but
that's right.
Still...
Yeah, book cousins twice removed. You're invited to the next family reunion. And obviously, you live in Malibu, I live on a farm in North Carolina. We're basically the same person. So
Totally.
Well, welcome. Let's just go ahead and kick it off. And I'm going to have you both do what all of my guests do. And that's give us the Chris and Julie 101. So usually when I have two guests, I let you guys decide. You get to fight. You fight to the death over who gets to go first. And then introducing yourselves, who you are, what you do, and how you got to where you are today.
The book is called Fighting for Family. So we can just start fighting now. Fighting for, not with.
That's right.
You want to go first?
No, you go.
Okay, so the long story short of it would be Julie and I met at 19, got married at 21. We were living in Texas at the time, and we jumped into full-time ministry and kind of gave our lives to that while we were finishing up school. And we had a really challenging first few years of marriage that we kind of stepped into. It's in the book. You have to read it, Julie.
Easy. Yeah. Very.
Yeah, it's fine.
Read it in the book. Yeah.
So we went through a lot of bumps and bruises our first years of marriage. Even had to get out of ministry for a season to heal. And we kind of started over and started having kids and ended up 2018 after pastoring a church in Norman, Oklahoma for nearly a decade through a series of wild, loud, clear ways God called our family to move to Los Angeles, as people do from Oklahoma.
Yeah, very normal.
They don't. We were like the Beverly Hillbillies. So we basically, with our 4 kids, moved to LA, didn't have a home, didn't have a job, just had really a word from God. And we were moving out to create media, but to build family with people predominantly that kind of left family. LA is a very lonely place, as busy as it is. And so, we moved there in 2018, moved in with a family that we met through some friends and planned on living there for 2 weeks while we kind of got settled and sold our house in Oklahoma that was under contract. And then the contract fell through, and I'll let Jules pick it up.
Yeah. So we were this really, we were going to be epically adventurous and conquer the next thing. And then the world began to conquer us. And we found ourselves starting out being very adventurous to then having to really choose to be a brave one. And a few weeks in, I was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer, and I needed to start chemo immediately. We had a choice to make. So the people that already thought we were crazy for coming now really thought we were crazy and was like, okay, it's time to come back. Now you still own your home in Oklahoma. And we had our stuff in storage in Texas or something, waiting to be moved here. So we had our 8 suitcases, the 6 of us. And it was a moment where we were like, and when we say we had a word from God, it wasn't just like, well, I think this is what he's saying. It was, we don't have time for that long story, but it was numerous things where it was undeniable that God is like, take the leap. And we had really come out of a hard season in ministry and church and a lot of things. And so we had kind of thought we'd already been through the hard. There was that all right, I've done the hard. So now we're coming into, a new season of all the dreams. Then you're like, wow, it's like the promised land actually has giants, So it's kind of how I viewed it. And we just made a decision the day that, we found I had cancer, and it was like, what do we do? Do we go back? Do we stay? And, so I was a week before I was about to move to LA. I went to the doctor and I was going to get a checkup, and they couldn't get me in. And basically I found I had cancer in LA, not in Oklahoma, because I would never have come. We would have never have come. And so we really believe that the Lord moved us here to save my life. There's lots of stories in between.
So then we made that decision to stay. And what that ended up leading to is moving 20 times over the next 6 months, all over LA. Not by choice. We couldn't get a home, financial reasons, because the house had fallen through. She's going through chemo, her hair's falling out, and kind of all of our dreams got put on pause because my full-time job was essentially taking care of my family. And we did that for several months and finally settled in Burbank, kind of North LA. And Julie was in remission for a year, and then cancer came back May 2020 in the midst of COVID. And that's all the while we're trying to write this book about family. And we, through our journey, had found all these people that were essentially like strangers that became friends, that became like family to us. And that's why this story, we kind of pull ourselves out of it at times and realize, okay, there's a bigger story that God's telling through all this.
Yeah. And, we talk about, there was this like decision of, are we going to take God at his word? Are you really who you say you are? Do we really believe everything we preached for decades? And, you go through hard, then you go through the really gritty hard that you didn't think you were ever going to go through. And you really have to go, okay, wait a second. Here's the memorial stones. This is who he's been. He doesn't change. Our situations change. Tomorrow is not promised. It's going to be easy as believers in Jesus, followers of Jesus, but his promise is he never leaves us. So we're like, we're going to take you at that. And whatever we have to walk through, we are going to know that you never change. So that was just an anchor for us.
Well, I think that just kicks us off in the perfect spot, is because this conversation in particular is one I feel like I've been having a lot lately with people in my church, with women in my Bible study, with my friends, is because I mean, just a lot of us, life is, this is what I talk about this all the time. Like, life is not linear. It is not, it is just, it's ups and downs. It's grief and joy. It's all of the things. And life, you're going to have these seasons where you're like, oh man, everything is great. Like, just, everything's running like, just, on all cylinders. And then you just have these times of your life where you just feel like not only have you been kicked down, but you're just like continuing to just receive like just pummeling after pummeling. And it feels like it's coming from all sides. And it's in those times where you really begin to question and everything. I'd be like, what do I believe? What do I know to be true? And how is God really who he says he is? And I always go back to Job, and just, Job loses everything and he's just like yelling at God and he's just crying out, and he has, he's surrounded by really terrible friends in that respect. But, it gets to the end of Job and you've got God just being like, look, I've had enough, but like, were you there when I put the water in the seas? Like, were you there when I taught the deer how to, graze? Were you there when I hung
how to crow?
The roosters crowed? Like the roosters had to crow, like put the stars and the sun and the moon in the sky. And it's just that reminder of like, that's right. I'm not in control, but he is. And so I say all that to say that, like, I love this conversation because I feel like it is so timely for so many people, and especially even just coming out of I feel like we're out of the pandemic at this point, but it's not that far in the rearview mirror. And so it's so many people over the last few years, like their foundations have been rocked, been shaken. And clearly for you, when you guys felt this really distinct, clear call from God to move from what was comfortable, and so often in those times when you're like, I have a very clear call of God on my life for XYZ, like literally whatever it is, and then all of a sudden you that God told you to go or do what he told you to do, and everything is shaken, and you're like, wait a second, what happened? And so how did you as a couple navigate that in the early stages when you're really in the thick of the shattering, of the being rattled, not in the hindsight part, but in the thick of it? So the question's really two parts. What did you do together as a couple? And then what did you do to help your kids through that?
Those are great questions. I mean, the title of this book is Fighting for Family. And I think that's the essence is, even Paul calls it a fight of faith. The things that we believe in, that we're committed to, don't come easily. They're things we actually have to fight for. Tagline of the book's the relentless pursuit of building belonging, because that's just kind of the essence. To get to your question is, we have this false sense of connection in this generation that we live in. And yet there was a U.S. Surgeon General put out this study in May, 85 pages. I'm not going to read it all, but it did say
About the loneliness pandemic.
Yes, epidemic of
Yes.
loneliness and isolation.
Yes.
And so I think for us, when we find out what we really believe about God, not when we get answers, it's when we're tested. And the week or 2 weeks after we moved to LA, kind of before everything began to fall apart, I get a text message from a guy in Oklahoma that I barely knew. He had tracked my number down. And he said, hey, I don't know if you remember me, but he said, God woke me up at 4 a.m. this morning to pray for your family. And he said, I felt like God said, it's your faith that got you to LA, but it's your trust that's going to keep you there. Because he said, trust gets at the deepest condition of the human heart. And he said, I feel like God's going to give you incremental clarity so that you learn to trust him along the way. So the point is this: we had faith to step out and make this move, but our willingness to stay came down to trust. To me, trust is like the undercurrent of faith, because our degree to take a risk and step out is in proportion to the depth of our trust in who God is and his faithfulness. So somebody asked me, did it rock my faith? My response was, it tested my faith. I didn't feel like my faith was rocked. I feel like it got tested. And then what Julie and I talk a lot about is just remembering God's track record. And so when our kids came into the story, and they were, they're now 20, 18, 15, and 12. This is 5-6 years ago. We just invited them into the story and gave them room and space to process. But what we would do is recall the faithfulness of God over our life before them. And what's been amazing to fast forward now is see they've gone through their own grief and pain and sorrow and losing a lot along the journey as well. But every one of our kids has a genuine faith, and it's not because we gave it to them. I think we invited them into it. Yeah.
No, that's good. I would say it's like I mentioned at the beginning of the book, and forget the movie in and of itself. It's this movie scene where you've got these invitations flooding through, and I grasp on so much about the invitation of God. So no matter what we're going through, like if it's your immediate family, like family's not about being married with 4 kids, right? It's your coworkers. It's my kids on their sports team. Like there's all these different aspects. And it's like, God is always giving us these invitations. That's like, we can carry them around and be like, that's so cool. I'm worthy of invitations. Like, but he doesn't force us to open it. He gives us a free will to choose. It's the beauty of our freedom. It's part of that. It's part of what God gives us. And he's like, invitations are really great if you open them, and when you open them, and so it was kind of like, okay, we're going to tear this open. Like, and God's like, okay. And it's remembering who he is. And so that's what we're doing with our kids. We're handing out invitations and we're going, hey, so giving space for, you got one that's so angry, one that's having some pretty severe anxiety, one that's experiencing all these different things. And we're giving space for that, but we're going to feel these beautiful emotions that God's given us. And we're going to not compartmentalize them, but then we're going to come above. Okay, now, but this is who he says, this is his word. And now we're going to come up. We're not going to ignore him, because they're going to come out because they're meant to come out. Right. So, and it's been us learning. We're guides. We're not experts on family. We are just, this whole book is about being a guide and about learning and growing. So.
Yeah. I love the idea of being a guide, but also like allowing God to guide you. Like that image of, my kids are in elementary school right now. And I'm the mom who gets suckered into chaperoning the field trips. And, every time we get chaperoned on a field trip, what happens is like, we're doing a tour and there's a guide that really is bringing us along and helping us, learn wherever it is throughout the museum or the mountain trip, or, we're visiting some like historical location. And like, without that guide, I would be completely lost. I would have no idea what's around me. I would have no idea what this landmark is. I would have no idea the significance of this random, statue is or something. So when you're on that field trip, like you're in the place that you just, you wouldn't know the significance of that random statue, or you wouldn't know the significance of that placard, or you would, be taken to the middle of some like, random park, and then you can't find your way out. And so like without the guide, like you can't have the experience you're supposed to experience. And so like, as I love that imagery of not only God being your guide, the guide for you, Chris and Julie, but then you also helping to guide your own family and guide your children, and then allowing, like, inviting God into that. And it's like, I think of the verse in it's Ecclesiastes, right? Like, a cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. Like, when you really interweave the Lord into your lives and allow him to be a part of it, like, you can't break that connection. That's so powerful.
Of His word.
Right. Well, one of the things I love that you talk about in your book, and I feel like it's such a great message, especially, how old are your kids, by the way? Yeah,
3
y'all
boys and
do
a girl.
not look old enough to have a 20-year-old. I'm just going to throw that out there. I need to know your skincare routine, Julie. Afterwards, we're going to talk about it's that Malibu life. But yeah, so I mean, my kids right now are 10 and 8. So, like, I'm a little bit behind you. I'm in the throes of elementary school, and it's so hard after a certain amount of time when you just feel like, I had to let go of, I can't be a perfect mom. I'm never going to be a perfect mom. I'm never going to be a perfect parent. My husband is not going to be a perfect father. Like, we have to point our kids to the perfect Heavenly Father, and really breaking that societal expectation of this idea of the perfect family. And I love one of the things you talk about in your book is chasing after a healthy family instead. And I would love for you to share, what does that look like? Because I think that is going to be really freeing for somebody about what a healthy family versus the perfect, keeping up with the Joneses, or like the perfectly posed, like Olin Mills family where they're all in white t-shirts and jeans. Do you remember the Olin Mills days where everybody had their fist under their chin? Every single one. Yeah. So what does that look like practically?
I love
it personally. I'm a big fan. I think you two are actually me and my husband. That's like exactly the kind of interaction we would have just had.
It's like
100%. Once he's forgiven us, it's gone. We're the only ones bringing it up again. Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Like, that is something that has been really, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, is revelatory a word? Yes, that's a word.
Yes, and I love that word. That was very articulate.
I majored in English and I wrote a book, and so I remember vocabulary. It's fine. It's fine. I love all the words. But yeah, a revelatory thing that for me this year has been, because I every year, like, I'll do, a Bible study that's like more, really slowing down and savoring. But then I also do a chronological plan where I read through the Bible in a year as well. And so I'm on my like 6th or 7th trip through chronologically. And so right now, like when we're recording this, I'm in the height of, I'm in Deuteronomy. And so, we're in the height of like they're prepping to go into the promised land. And one of the things that I have really been, just resonating with is God always, like, whatever he uses the word remember, it's about what he has done. Like, it's about remembering is about God's attributes, what God has done, God's promises. Like, he's not, and anytime there's like conversation about things that have happened before, it's because you forgot who I was. It's forgot what I did for you. You forgot that I brought you out of slavery. Like, you know what I mean? And so that's been a thing that I have just been really thinking about, is like, anytime God is really wanting us to remember something, it's not what we did, it's what he has done. And it takes the eyes off of ourselves and our circumstances and puts them onto him. And I'm telling you, like, that is just something that I am like, I haven't like come to a, conclusion. I don't have like a sermon written or anything about it, but it's been one of those just sweet things where, there you go. That's my brief sermon. But it's one of those things that I'm like, I need to dig into that, because every time, we see it all throughout scripture. Like, anytime something's repeated or a message is like coming across to you more than once, it's clearly like God being like, hello, pay attention to this. And, and so, the fact that like, do not fear or fear not is written 365 times in the Bible, like, clearly. And it's always in like reference to like God's presence. And so like, anytime the word remember is really brought up, it's about who God is and what he's done and not what we've done, and dwelling on the things of the past. And like, once we are forgiven and we accept God's gift of forgiveness, like, it's our turn to move on because God has moved on. All of this is so good. Well, there was something else that I love, by the way, the Wonderwall idea, stealing that in the name of Jesus, by the way, just,
Take it away.
love it so much. But the other thing, especially for people listening who, maybe are not married or don't have kids, or, these principles are applicable in all relationships. And I love that you talk about chosen family. I mean, obviously I love my family, but my friends too we refer to ourselves as chosen family. Like, I have, some friends and their kids who, like, we're all each other's, kids, like aunts and uncles and nieces and nephews, even though we're not related by blood. And that aspect of chosen family, I think, is so beautiful and it's biblical. We see that all throughout the Bible of friends who become family, or people who just really, the theme of adoption is obviously all over the scriptures. But one of the things I really love about what you talk about when it comes to not just chosen family, but just in general, like being present in relationships, creating healthy relationships, whether it's with your actual blood family, your chosen family, your friends. You talk about the 3 commitments, and your 3 commitments are, number 1, I admit that I can't control everything. Number 2 is I will be messy around others. And number 3 is I will let other people be complicated. And this idea of, like, this is how you show up. And so I would love for you to talk about, like, where did that all stem from? What's the heart of that? And how do people listening apply those commitments to their own lives for what it looks like for them to show up, in their relationships with other people?
Yeah. I mean, I think first we start is like, we're not here to control people and to control outcomes. And I think in anything that you call family, we talk in our parenting, which is like, how do we be protective without controlling? How do we not? Because control is rooted in fear. And so I think because of fear and shame. And so over the years, even before we had kids, we've always had people living with us. And I think that's where we started to learn some of the challenges and complexities of, it sounds really good. Come live with us. We're going to do life together. And then, my goodness,
week 1, they're like, y'all aren't that great. I'm like, well, I tried to tell you.
We're like, you're not either. So
yeah, you're not either. Yeah, exactly. And go ahead.
Yeah. So I think it's just, you have to put it into practice, which is, how do I meet people where they are at, which is why the life and the ministry of Jesus that I think gets so misrepresented is what we see in his life was his accessibility, his availability, and who he spent his time with. And obviously he had his core, he had his 12 and he had his 3. But, the reason he was accused of being a drunkard and a glutton was because of who he spent time with and had food with, who he sat down at the table with in their homes. And so he's called a friend of sinners because who he was willing to associate with. And I think sometimes if we're not careful, especially even as Christians, and I pastor a church, is we can so remove ourselves from the world we're actually called to sit at the table with. And so we've tried to really put that into practice, is how do we create spaces with people that are different than us? We don't have to agree, but we can actually seek understanding and let love be a really core part of that. I don't know, what would you say?
No, that was good, babe. You should be a preacher or something. No, I don't know if I'd add too much more to that, but there was a time when I don't know if it was the beginning or end of COVID. I don't know. I was in the middle of chemo, but chemo brain. But there were some singles. We wanted to learn from singles. We were married at 21. We didn't know what it was like to be single. Being single in high school doesn't count, right? Whatever that means.
Mm-hmm.
So
you were dating Jesus.
Yeah, exactly. No, I wasn't. I was dating way too many guys. Don't do what I did. So they were gathered around our table, and we were like, they were in their 30s and 40s, and we were talking about belonging and what's hard about being single and what that looks like in families. And sometimes a church can elevate being married over everything else. And we were just having this beautiful discussion. And this mic drop moment, she said, belonging is not something that you find, it's something that you bring. And we were like, I'm sorry, could you say that again? And I feel like Jesus did that so well. I feel like it was like, wow, it's, and I think that comes out of some of those 3 things, like people are able to do that and bring belonging when we give space for not having it all together, being messy. And we use the word unity a lot in the church and outside of the church. And I think that comes from recognizing belonging is just not a one-way street. And that belonging is about, when we talk about like and hide and seek, having a home base, right? And we all need a home base. We're always trying to find like, let's not get to home base. And a home base is something where we're like, okay, I can feel safe and be seen and known, so I can walk out those things, whether we're best friends or not.
Yeah. I love, well, I particularly resonated with, I mean, obviously for some people, control might be the thing that they struggle with the most. I particularly resonated with, obviously like being messy around others was not as hard for me, but letting other people be complicated, because it was actually a reminder that I am actually complicated. If I'm going to be messy around other people, then that I'm going to be proving to others that I'm complicated. So I need to extend that same grace to others, is to let them be complicated. And that really does, like, when you get into deep into a relationship where you can be safe around people. And I've been really grateful because the last couple of years, it's not that I didn't have friends in my adulthood. It's not, it's not like I was like walking around friendless, but I really prayed for a group of friends that just could be the kind of friends where it's like you text and you just say, hey, like, who wants to come over and sit on the porch for a little bit? My house isn't clean. Like, I'm not changing out of my leggings. Like, our kids are going to just destroy probably everything in one another's house. And it just is going to be what it is. And creating that safe, those safe people that you can not only like rebuke a little bit when they need to be rebuked, you can correct them when they need to be corrected, you can encourage them and celebrate them when they need to be celebrated. They do the same for you. Like the true definition of like iron sharpening iron. And God's been so sweet to answer that prayer in the last couple of years, and through our church and our life group. And it's just, and it's then, our life group has been rocked in the last year or so with just like loss and pain and life. And it's been really beautiful to see God ordain these people to show up for one another and to pray for each other and to sit with one another in the hard things. And when marriage is hard, when parenting is hard, when career, our work life is hard, or we're grieving or whatever, like, we can show up and we can just say like, I'm not okay. And I just need you to sit with me in my not okayness. That is such a gift. But I say all that and I acknowledge that for some people listening, like that's a tender thing because they don't necessarily have that. And I've been thinking about not just that the fact that I was praying for that, but I had to be vulnerable enough to like be the first one to be like, hey, would you like to come over for dinner? Like, I remember, I'm going to give this one example and then I'll, I know we're running out of time, but like when we got involved in a church plant, and we were at a really big church before, and we loved that church, but God, there's long story how he called us to be a part of a church plant. And so really early on, my husband and I were like, okay, what we want to do is we want to identify people in our church. Like, the goal is to eventually have everybody individually, like couples, families, individuals, like over for dinner, just to break bread, get to know them, so that we know the people that we're going to church with. And so all the people that are in our like life group that we are friends with, it all started because we just invited them over for dinner. And I remember, and like, we didn't really know them. Like, we kind of knew them, but we were like, hey, do y'all want to come over for dinner? Like, I'll cook. Like, you don't have to bring anything if you don't want to. Like, and I remember one couple in particular, when they walked out of the door that night, like, we had this great dinner, like, they were here, they brought their kids and they're running around, and like, the kids are being loud, and we're sitting around talking over the kids running around, and it's loud, you know what I mean? And they were there for like 4 hours. And then when they finally left, the door closed, and my husband looked at me and he was like, I think in a couple of years, that guy, like the husband, he's like, I think he's going to be one of my best friends in the whole wide world. And like, here we are 2 years later. And like, that's absolutely true. And so it's been really cool to see, like, all it took was us kind of putting it out there and being like, do you want to come over for dinner and hang out?
Right.
It doesn't have to be complicated, but we have to be intentional, because it's not going to happen on accident.
No, and it's never, sorry. Yeah, go.
No, and you know, it helped me with that too is when I think back at times like, well, why aren't they inviting me, or I want to hang out, or why are they doing, it's like, instead of staying in that place, like sometimes I've heard the Lord go, stop expecting you from other people. And I'm like, oh, meet people where they're at, you know, and they're not going to be the same type of pursuer. They're not going to do this. They're not going to resolve conflict like you do. And it's like some of your pain and you're like, I feel alone or I feel left out is coming from you thinking that they're going to think and act and be like you, and they're not. And as I removed that, I was able to go, okay, so I'm going to step out, you know, and people are reaching out and doing that based on how they're wired. And so when we understand that and meet them where they're at, it's like a whole new world. There you go. Just really wanted to say.
Oh my goodness. Well, I could talk about this all day long. But we have run out of time. Chris and Julie, tell everybody like where they can follow you guys and get the book and connect with you and just support your work. Tell them all the things.
Our little family.
So our book, Fighting for Family, I mean, you can get it everywhere books are sold now. But go to fightingforfamily.org. And that has all the info about the book, has events where, you know, by the time this airs, I'm sure those might be over. But yeah, we would just love to connect and give us their email and we'll stay connected.
You can always send an email, reach out. We love hearing people's stories. So yeah.
Awesome. Oh man, so good. Chris and Julie, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for the work that you're doing and putting out into the world. You're awesome.
Thanks, Molly. We're excited about your book too. Let's go.
Thank you.